Hi, students. You've just completed your first essay in our course, a rhetorical analysis, and we're ready to jump into essay two. This is a research paper, but it may be different than other research papers you've written before. I want you to take a moment and pause this video to read the instructions for essay two located on our course calendar on the same date as this video. As you read in the instructions, you're going to focus on the same topic you've been writing about all semester, and you will stick to the issue in the article that you used for your rhetorical analysis. But this time, you'll get to argue some point about that issue with the author of that article. This is your opportunity to speak to that author of that article and have an educated, argumentative conversation about some point or points you disagree with him or her about. Maybe you already know a point or points you disagree with, or maybe you think you totally agree with the author. At this point, I want you to think about that issue from your article with an open mind. During the next week, you'll do some library research on this topic, and most likely you will learn something new about this issue that will help you formulate an argument about some aspect of this issue. Since we are learning about argumentation and persuasion, I don't want you to just write a research paper arguing your side of the issue. I want you to learn how to argue a point. I want you to think about your rhetoric, how you say what you say to persuade others. And I want you to have a real audience to argue with. So basically, I want you to think about how you put together this argument in the most effective way possible. You learned in your readings that an argument is when two or more reasonable people who disagree work together to achieve a goal and find a solution. That sounds much more calm, peaceful, and beneficial than just having a fight, doesn't it? In an argument, thinking about your rhetoric is so important. Knowing how to say what you say to persuade your opponent takes some very critical thought, time, research, and even curiosity. You have to learn about your issue, you have to do some research in the library, ask questions about the topic to get to logical answers. And then, of course, you need to spend time thinking about who will listen to your argument. How will you get through to them? How can you make that audience want to listen to your side in a reasonable way? In argumentation, all these thoughts are boiled down to three key words: purpose, audience, and form. To help you think about this, think about the questions associated with these three words. Purpose relates to why an argument was written. Audience relates to who was the argument written for, and form relates to how the argument was written. Purpose, of course, deals with your goals in this writing. What are you trying to accomplish with your essay? I want you to think about this carefully. If your goal is to simply pass this course, consider more about what you want your paper and your words to do. Some common writing goals are to persuade, to inform, to reflect on an issue, to entertain, to argue, to advise, to instruct. It's important to also remember that there is more than one purpose in most writing. Think about a text message you sent recently, for example. Let's say you sent somebody a grocery list, but you also inserted a funny or cute emoji in that grocery list as well. So your purpose was really twofold. You informed your audience about the groceries, but you also entertained them. In this next essay, all of you will have the purpose to argue. But what else do you want to do in your argument? So give that some thought. Audience, of course, focuses on your listeners or your readers. You consider their thoughts, beliefs, and how they differ from you. So you consider their age, their gender, their education, their location, their occupation, or even their socioeconomic status. Sometimes we don't have all that information about our audience, but often we have enough to understand what our audience's values are. And this is what's most important in an argument. Values are those beliefs that your audience clings to most tightly. And values are core beliefs that are often never going away in somebody. It's what they consider most important in life. For example, many people who oppose gun regulation commonly argue that It's their constitutional right to bear arms. Let's say you were trying to argue against that in favor of gun control, and your audience happened to be the NRA members or the National Rifle Association. You would probably use their core value, their liberty, their rights, and their freedom granted to them by the US government in your argument somehow. Because it's so impossible to argue against somebody's values, it's important to understand their values and use those values in your own side of the issue. A more real life example, let's say, is when a couple's arguing about whether or not to stay together. Many times they have a shared value of children. And so that's what keeps the relationship going. Y'all are going to research your audience, the author of the article you chose for your rhetorical analysis. As you write this paper, try to understand what values they have in order to craft an argument to them more effectively. And lastly, we have form. Form is something we will focus on carefully from here on out this semester. Form is about what techniques you, as the writer, will use on purpose to communicate your message. Form can also refer to what format you use. Will your writing be a letter, a poster, a blog post? But I also want you to think more about technique here. What kind of argument will you craft? You will notice that your essay number 2 is titled Researched Rogerian Letter. The format is obvious. You will write a letter, and you understand that you will write this letter to the article's author. But for now, when you think about a letter as a form of writing, you probably think about speaking to someone, a real person. Also, you usually open a letter explaining why you're writing. For example, you typically start an email by stating, I'm writing to you because, or something like that. Letters also have main points to cover with a clear closing statement. You also can see that you will use research because this is called a research Rogerian letter. So you must incorporate evidence based on research sources in your letter. But there may be a word in this assignment that you have never encountered: Rogerian. Rogerian has to do with a type of argumentation style that is quite common. In fact, it's common in group counseling to get people to understand one another, to understand different points of views, and to open lines of communication that may have been closed. It is named after Carl Rogers, a psychologist who focused on getting his patients to practice empathic listening, or listening with sensitivity in order to identify another person's point of view. Let's see how this argument looks. I'm going to show you a basic outline for this kind of argumentation, and I'm going to be referencing the student's sample to this assignment. You can find a link to the student sample right here in the instructions. I suggest pausing this video now and reading this sample so the rest of this lecture will make more sense. In a Rogerian argument, your goal is to first summarize your opponent's argument to show that you fully understand their point of view. Lucky for you, we've practiced summarizing all semester, and of course, you may already have a summary ready to go from the article that you wish to use for this paper. Here is the summary paragraph in the student sample. Notice that it comes after a brief introduction from the student to open up her letter. In this small introduction, she's basically describing why she's writing and how she got interested in the topic. Second, in a Rogerian argument, you find common ground with your audience. Depending on your audience, you may find this difficult, but think about those values your audience may have because most likely you share some of those values as well. You may also have agreement with your audience about basic points in the issue. Whatever that common ground is in a Rogerian argument, that is what you want to play up at the beginning. Rogerian arguments are also known for being non aggressive. In other words, people who participate in this style of argumentation Always have respect for one another and seek to understand one another with curiosity. Here's the beginning of the paragraph in the student sample where the student shows the common ground with the author. Notice how she uses phrases like, I understand, I recognize, or I agree, to show that she and the author share certain values. These phrases help her establish a link between her and the author. I want you to also see that she has research in this paragraph as well to help show why she agrees with the author. This helps the student seem credible and knowledgeable. In other words, she's building her own ethos. Next, you will discuss your points from your thesis within paragraphs. You may be thinking, but I haven't stated my thesis yet. And you are right. And I will show you where a thesis goes in a minute. In these next paragraphs, make sure to support your points with valid recent research that means something to your audience. Research that will touch on those values they have. Please consult the essay instructions for what type of sources that I require and will accept for this assignment. In this paragraph and the next, the student brings up 2 points of disagreement with the author. Notice how the student uses topic sentences to keep her focused and on track with the point that she's bringing up. Also, notice that she uses words to show that she's been considering this topic, like ponder or asking herself questions. This kind of word choice keeps her from being too confrontational, which is exactly what you want to stay away from in a Rogerian argument. But remember, she's still arguing a point. So she still has research to prove her side of the issue. I know that our last essay required you to stay away from arguing about the issue and only focus on the author's rhetoric. But here is your turn to argue about the issue. Also, a huge idea to keep in mind as you write your argumentative paragraph is your rhetoric. Recall all the rhetorical appeals you have been reading about and studying. Appeals to emotions, appeals to logic, and appeals to your own credibility. How can you stir the reader's emotions, for example? How can you appeal to your reader's logic? And how can you showcase that you are credible? Perhaps in your research that you will do, you'll come across a story related to your topic that can help stir your reader's emotions as you prove your point. That's an appeal to emotion, pathos. Perhaps you'll have lots of hard data in your letter to help support your point of view. Remember, that's an appeal to logic or logos. Of course, maintaining a respectful and thoughtful tone will help you establish your own credibility. And of course, that's ethos. I hope by now you understand that fallacies are flaws in logic that you don't want to use in your argument. A seasoned thinker knows what these are and can spot them in your argument, so stay away from those while you argue your point. Remember, do not use logical fallacies in this essay. Finally, your conclusion. Here's where you'll have an opportunity to state your point of view, your thesis, in a concise statement. You may be thinking that the thesis is coming a little late in the paper. Actually, it's coming a lot late, and you're absolutely right. A Rogerian argument uses what is known as a delayed thesis model. In other words, you put your thesis on hold until the end. The reason this is so effective in a Rogerian argument is that by this time, you've shown your audience that you understand their point of view, and you have even established common ground with your audience. You've also presented your points of view in a respectful manner. You have your audience's attention, so they are more ready to listen to your thesis. Let's take a look at the student's sample thesis that I've highlighted in yellow. In this student sample, we can see her thesis embedded in her conclusion. She's making a claim. She cannot help but believe that parents should not be allowed to base their children's health care solely on their religion. And she's supporting her claim with researched reasons. And she's using a because clause, just like you've learned early on in this semester. And she has two reasons in that because clause: because it is not constitutional, and second, because it's not in the child's best interest. Those are the same two reasons she brought up earlier in her paragraphs with research. The traditional argument requires you to state your opinion, your thesis, much early on in the introduction section. And while there may be an occasion for this type of argumentation style, I want to teach you Rogerian argumentation because it has real world benefits for you. In other words, you can use this style of argumentation in conversation with your partner, your boss, your friend, and experience the benefits of well thought out rhetoric. In fact, I've had students tell me they've tried this method in their day to day life and they see the results of this approach. I challenge you to do the same. Remember, in your conclusion, you are speaking to a real person this time, a real person who is reading this letter, and you have to showcase why your perspective is important and answer, so what? A Rogerian argument is probably much different than other argumentative papers you've written, as it seems non confrontational, conversational, and focused on building a bridge of communication rather than just screaming out your opinion early on as in a debate. You will find that this style of argumentation is much more challenging, but you will learn about your own beliefs through this process and not simply engage in a confrontational debate. Good luck, and I'll see you online.